Well, viewers, those are the headlines. On to our top focus. More than 4 decades after the deadly bombing of Air India Flight 182, the Kanishka tragedy that killed all 329 people on board, many of them Indian origin, the memory of one of the world's deadliest aviation terror attacks continues to resonate deeply. In a significant moment, Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has paid homage at the Kanishka Memorial, remembering the victims and calling for collective resolve against terrorism. The tribute comes nearly 4 decades on, with renewed focus on the tragedy. NewsX's extensive coverage and campaign on the Kanishka bombing has helped bring the issue back into mainstream focus, contributing to wider public conversation and even a moment of silence being observed in the Indian Parliament. The 1985 bombing remains a painful reminder of the human cost of terrorism and the long fight for justice and remembrance. Joining us on the broadcast is a very special guest, Mr. Sanjay Lazar. He is a kin of one of the victims in the Kanishka bombing, an aviation expert as well. Sir, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX. For a very long time, not many people have known about this tragic terror attack. You've lost your family in this particular attack as well, that was carried out by Khalistani terrorists. You know, during our campaign at NewsX, we had carried out a survey in which a couple of revelations were there that 9 in 10 Canadians have known little or nothing on the attack. In fact, 58% of Canadians below the age of 35 have no knowledge of this particular terror attack as well. And 40 years on, now we see this growing consciousness, this growing realization and remembrance of the victims. How do you feel?
Morning, and thank you, Pia, for having me on your show. It is very true to say that NewsX has been at the forefront of raising the Kanishka bombing issue over the last few years, and I commend you for it. Thank you very much. Yes, I lost my entire family. I was orphaned as a teenager. My dad, my mom, and my baby sister died in that. I'm grateful that the minister has gone and paid homage. I know all of us family members were told and invited. You know, there was a special function there on the day that he visited. But, you know, it begs the question, you're right, 9 out of 10 Canadians still don't know about this. But my question is to the Indian government. 40 years on, we've been writing to the Prime Minister and the ministers, and there's no memorial in India that we have to have our ministers go to Canada. There's a memorial in Ireland, there are 4 in Canada, but none in India. It was an Indian aircraft with Indian crew, lots of Indian passengers. Even the Canadians were of Indian origin, and yet we don't see even a mention or a plaque in Delhi or anywhere. And that is more painful than anything else. Yes, of course, the travesty of justice, Pia, that I attended the trials, we attended the inquiry, we got no justice. That has been a crime against humanity and against us. But, you know, to have the Indian government just, you know, ignore it for 41 years, next month will mark 41 years. And that's, you know, what I'd like to use your channel to reach out to the government. Why are we not doing something? We just get promises year after year. So yes, of course, it does upset me, because when I see Canadian politicians, Canadian parliamentarians talking about reopening the case, Indian government did this, did that, there's a lot of rubbish that flows, you know, with the tide. But we all know we've been through an entire criminal trial. We've been through the John Major inquiry. Yes. I was a petitioner there myself. And I, you know, the facts have already come out, you know, 20 years ago. The fact is that we need to move forward and hold those responsible, and there are still some alive, and bring to book these people. The second thing is we need to focus on terrorism. And what better way than that, than commemorating those who died in the worst aviation bombing in history, even till today. So this is what I, you know, have to say and feel about it very strongly.
Indeed. And what's also a little known fact amongst the public at large is that the Kanishka bombing was the worst terror attack that humanity has seen up until 9/11. A lot of people talk about 9/11, it's embedded in public consciousness, but in comparison, we've seen the momentum with regards to the remembrance of the victims of the Kanishka bombing only pick up quite recently following extensive coverage by NewsX. For you, as you've highlighted, meaningful remembrance would mean establishing a memorial in India as well. But we've also seen, as far as justice is concerned, it has absolutely not been delivered in this particular case. You've had only one of the four masterminds who has been convicted. The rest have all gone scot-free. How do you think the Indian government should then take this up with Canada? We have seen a change in the outlook of the Canadian administration at large ever since Mark Carney has come to power. Is there a hope that, yes, this case, if pressure is applied, might be reopened?
Yeah, a couple of very important facts. The Mark Carney government has definitely made a huge change in the attitude of Canada towards the Khalistani terrorists, as well as the Air India Kanishka 182 case. I'll have you know that there is still a task force that exists with the RCMP that is called the Air India 182 task force. This is still a live investigation 40 years on. So there is a group of officers, they have a team that's still investigating. There are 5 or 6 conspirators, co-conspirators still under watch across Canada and in other parts of the world. So it's not totally unknown or unimaginable that they could hold somebody responsible. If you remember last year, around this time, Mr. X had died, and the RCMP made it known. Mr. X was one of the unknown conspirators who triggered off the bomb at Vancouver Island, 10 days before the crash. They test fired the bomb. So yes, India's pressure will help to continue the investigation and bring to book at least somebody or get a deathbed confession from one of those remaining co-conspirators. It's very, very important. And I'm glad to see at least that, the Indian government is trying to apply some modicum of pressure. I hope they continue to do that. And I do hope that, we get both the memorial and justice. Eventually, there are lots of us families who are Indians and who are in India and who still wait for that. It's, of course, 200 plus families were Canadians, but they were Canadians of Indian origin, and they've got their relatives and families in Delhi, in Punjab, in Mumbai, in South India. And we all look forward to the day when we'd have something.
Yes, indeed. You've mentioned one of the key lapses, which was highlighted in the John C. Major report, the test bombing 10 days before the actual terror attack. There was a telex from Air India that was ignored as well. There were a series of lapses. In light of that, what lessons can then be taken forward to prevent future tragedies like this?
Well, of course, you're right. There was the famous June 1st telex. There was the, bombing which CSIS and RCMP actually monitored.
Yes.
The test firing of the bombing, where Parmar and Mr. X and the others were there. But we all know that, the lapses, security lapses, whether it was, known, unknown, or whatever it be, occurred. And it resulted in 2 bombs going off. One across, at Narita Airport, which killed 2 baggage handlers on the same day, an hour before that. And one, of course, the Air India Kanishka. So there were 2 bombs. And, that is a part of history today. Of course, I was part of the John Major Commission. I was a petitioner, like I said. And, what lessons we can learn is, of course, that terrorism does not deserve a place in our society. And, we, governments across the world, need to crush it with the impunity it deserves, especially in Canada, where the previous government was very liberal and permitted, the tail to wag the dog, so to speak. I'm glad that, this current government has changed its attitude towards Khalistani separatists and is slowly bringing Canada back towards the mainstream globalized world that does not tolerate terror. And I hope that Indian government keeps putting pressure. And as a family member, like I said, we pray and hope for justice and, of course, the memorial someday in Delhi.
Absolutely, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX.